I wanted to start off by saying love the movie. And specifically I really loved like the shot types. There was a lot of interesting ones that throughout the whole entire movie. So I was wondering what kind of inspired the style of that movie because it was very, very seems like there was a lot of inspiration from a lot of different things.
Oh, thank you so much. Yeah, I would say it's funny. The visual language of the movie was so part and parcel with the concept. So when I started writing the first draft of the screenplay, I was simultaneously putting together a visual lookbook kind of,
Mm.
which is something I would normally wait for much later in the process to do once the script was a lot further along. But in this case, it just felt so intertwined with the story. And I think a lot of that stemmed from the fact that Cliff's whole experience, he doesn't really know what's real, what's not, who to trust, who not to trust. He's always
Yeah.
being conned. So I wanted to have a slightly dreamlike quality or a slightly heightened, not fully placed in reality. Also, he's always alienated from the world around him. So one way to articulate that is by making the world around him feel a little surreal. So it became fun to play with that. So early on, the location, the setting, all of that, the colors of it all became like a really important part of an entry point into the story. And in terms of references, my cinematographer Dimitri and I, and our production designer and costume designer, everyone looked at a lot of still photography. I tend to collect a lot of references from still photography, and there's a couple of photographers, and I'm so bad with names, but very iconic, who do a lot of great shots of like reflections, people in reflections. So early on, I even baked it into the screenplay where a lot of characters are seen through reflections, and it plays into that whole idea of not knowing what to believe, what to trust. There's not a lot of clarity. He doesn't know if what he's looking at is, he doesn't have the clear picture always. So there's all these metaphors, and because it's a slightly dreamlike kind of world, it allowed us to. I felt like it gave us permission to be a little bit, I guess, on the nose with these symbolism and metaphor in a way that was kind of fun to play with. And so, yeah, and then I would also say a lot of it stemmed from the locations. We shot in this very small town in Western Canada called Cache Creek in British Columbia, and it was all practical locations. And I spent a couple months in BC just location scouting, which was so much fun to just wander around to all these different towns and all these different buildings and find the ones with the most character.
Yeah.
So we tried to use a lot of what was already there, but then our production designers would come in, and our production team would come in, and our art department, and transform a few of them, because you only have the resources to focus on a few. So we found as many that were already kind of the vibe we were looking for, and then transformed the others, and then that's how we kind of landed where we are. Yeah.
Yeah, because when a lot of the shots, they feel very like, especially like the dream sequences, they feel very Lynchian in some ways. And so what was it like putting those scenes together, and especially with the score, because the score works so well with the whole entire movie. So like, what was it like putting some of those scenes together?
Um, Thanks. Yeah, our composers, it's a duo named Adrian Ellis and Walker Grimshaw, and they're so amazing and talented, and just I'm so lucky that they are even willing to work with me, because I feel like they're so accomplished. But they're also, it's interesting because they're a team, but there's no ego with them. Like I never know if an idea comes from one or the other. And I never have to, and I don't care. It's just whatever they do together comes out so well.
Yeah.
They just work so seamlessly. So yeah, the score is great. Those dream sequences were so much fun to put together, and it was such a collaboration between all the departments, because there's a number of fully CGI shots that were rendered entirely in post, but then we shot a lot obviously on location in these kind of sets that the art department built, or there's one part of the dream that takes place in kind of a tunnel of a cave kind of,
Yeah.
and that was an old mini golf course that we found that had this existing cave set basically. And so I actually wrote that into the script because I loved it so much when I saw it. I'm like, this looks like an expensive set in a way, but we didn't have to build it, so we just could exploit what was already there. But yeah, those see, that's particularly, there's one long dream sequence that was a really fun creative thing to put together for all the departments, and yeah, I think everyone brought so much to it.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, because the score in this whole entire movie, I think score and visuals are always the things that can really bring a script to life. Um, and yeah, the score was just like incredible, and it's just one of those things where I feel like it kind of just sticks with you, and it's very haunting in some ways. But yeah, I mean, it's the film's really hilarious, as well. But a lot of the times, queer stories don't really get this kind of treatment. A lot of the times the people see it as like it has to be serious, otherwise it's like offensive in some ways. And so, what was it like to kind of bring this kind of queer story onto big screen?
Oh, thanks. Yeah, I think I always approach it just as telling a story about characters I'm interested in. Where does the story want to go? And because I'm queer, I'll write queer characters into it. So for starters, I try to just not pay attention to any of the expectations of a niche or a genre because I think those can be so limiting. And you're right,
Yeah,
there's a very narrow-minded approach to it within the industry, I think, where people will say, like I've heard even with a lot of my movies, but this one included, like some distributors will say, oh, it's too gay for a mainstream audience, but it's not gay enough for a gay audience. It doesn't fit the mold. And
yeah,
I think that's really underestimating the audience. I think audiences are really receptive to new takes on stories. So, yeah, I actually love the opportunity to tell a queer story that looks and feels different than what we're used to necessarily seeing
true.
from that genre and breaks the mold a bit. So, yeah, that's definitely an exciting opportunity that's important to me. I don't. I think it's very important to tell. There's certain queer stories we're used to seeing that I think are important to keep telling, like coming out stories or overcoming certain discrimination or historical, and those are all very, very important. But I'm also interested in stepping outside of that and telling different kinds of stories that
Yeah.
have a queer perspective. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean the end's like kind of like sort of third act very much gave Bonnie and Clyde-esque, and it really, really reminded me of this thing that a lot of queer people saying, that's be gay and do crimes, and it very much reminded me of that saying that a lot of gay people say.
I love
So I
that.
was wondering, did that kind of come into your mind when you were writing the script?
That particular phrase didn't, but I love that. I'm going to use that from now on. And I do think it's interesting because I was thinking once we got into BFI Flair and I was thinking about it as a queer film, there's obviously a lot of overtly queer characters and queer content, but
Yeah,
I also think that the character of Marg, who's kind of a criminal in this world, her sexuality isn't explored that much, but I think she lives a very queer lifestyle in her own way because, in the sense that she doesn't play by any rules. And I think, in a broader sense, I think of being queer, you kind of get to make your own rules in life because there isn't this societal set of expectations necessarily to the
yeah,
same extent. And I think Marg is someone who's so independent and fiercely devoted to living her life her own way. Now, she doesn't go about it in a very ethical way and she kind of breaks all the rules and she's kind
yeah,
of living by her own ethical playbook. And but I think there's a queer sensibility behind that character. Yeah.
yeah. Because I think a lot of queer people, we kind of choose to live our own ways. And so even though it's kind of frowned upon by a lot by society, we kind of then just take it into jokes and do stuff like be gay, do crimes just because we're already a crime. We might as well be like committing crimes because, stuff.
Yeah, that's a really good way of putting it. Exactly. Yeah.
Um, One of my favorite relationships was Cliff and his mum. They have a very, very complicated relationship in some ways. And so what was it like writing their relationship with one another?
And are you talking about his birth mom or his adoptive mom?
His adopted mum.
Yeah, yeah. So yeah, that actor Irina is so talented, and she brings so much heart and authenticity to that character, which I love. But yeah, their relationship is very complicated, and I think a lot of people will hopefully be able to relate to it because I think a lot of us have that kind of relationship with our moms. She cares a lot, but she worries, and she's a little overbearing at times, and he's trying to rebel against her in his own little ways. And there's a lot of friction and tension, but it comes from a place of love. I think, because it's a movie about a character, Cliff, who reconnects with his estranged birth mother, it would have been very easy to write him having a very dysfunctional relationship with his own parents or be estranged but I didn't want to go that road. I wanted to treat them with a lot of empathy, and they're ultimately very kind parents. Like his adoptive
Yeah.
parents are very genuine and sincere, and but within that, there's still a lot of tension because I think any parent-child relationship, especially at that age, he's a young man coming into his own, trying to find his identity, feeling lost. There's going to be a lot of tension between them, even if it comes from a place of love and care.
Yeah. I mean, speaking of like mother relationships, there's a scene between Cliff and his biological mum in the diner, and basically he laughs and she turns around and is like, "Your laugh is just like mine." He's like, "I hate my
Mm-hmm.
laugh." And
Mm-hmm.
I think it very much says so much about that dynamic just in that one scene alone. And so, what was it like to, make that scene? Because it tells the audience so much about their relationship with one another.
Well, thanks. Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that scene because the other day we were asked what our favorite scene in the movie was, and that was the first that came to mind because I just love Noah and Liza's performance. Noah Parker and Liza Weil, who are our two leads, are so locked in and they're doing so much below the surface in that scene. They just elevated that scene so much with their performances. And yeah, that was also a scene that I was anticipating, and when we were on set shooting it, it felt like, okay, we're really making this movie. It kind of snaps you out of the,
Yeah.
circus of making the movie, because to see them in that diner sitting, it just felt like, oh, we're really making this movie because it's such a pivotal moment. You're right, and I think you're right. That moment where he rejects that part of himself, and she's able to say, well, if you're anything like me, you'll learn to love your laugh. It's sort of this implication of, well, you're my biological son, even though we've never met. There's this deep connection. There's some kind of um, you know, profound connection that no one else can share with you. And this character of Cliff is looking for that. He's looking for some kind of connection, and he's mostly looking for it in romantic partners up until that point. But all of a sudden, he finds it with in this unexpected place. So yeah, it's a very complicated scene, even though on the surface they're laughing and they're joking, but there's a lot going on. I think, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, because we never really see queer characters relate to their parents in such ways. I think in a lot of
Mm.
movies, it's either, oh, we're so, so accepting of you, like, or it's the complete opposite of, them kind of struggling. But you never really get queer stories where a person has such a complicated relationship with their parents. And
That's
so
so
to bring it
true.
to bring it to such like a big film festival just to celebrate queer stories, what's it been like?
It's been such a dream. I mean, it's such an honor to be a BFI Flair, especially the 40th anniversary. It's such a, I feel very, very lucky. The whole cast and crew feels very, very lucky. And it's been a wonderful experience. Everyone here is so welcoming. It's such a fun, celebratory atmosphere at this festival. So we feel very lucky that we get to have our premiere here, our world premiere.
Yeah, because I mean, I think London is very much a very, very big queer city. I think we're very accepting of one another. Even if people don't get it, I think a lot of people are still going to enjoy this film, whether, they relate to it or not, because I think for queer comedies, it's just they usually do so well with other queer people, and like you always still get that kind of sense of belonging when watching another queer comedy movie. So, do you have any kind of queer comedy movies or just a queer movie in general that really inspired you to make some movies yourself?
Yeah, there's such a great legacy of important queer movies that I really connect with and love. Well, one that I discovered quite recently, our sales agent, when he watched this, one of the references he thought of was Gregg Araki, and I was very embarrassingly not as familiar with Gregg Araki's work as I should be. So I finally watched Mysterious Skin, which is being re-released, and they're actually doing an advanced screening here at BFI
Yeah.
Flair. But that's just a coincidence because this was months ago, and I watched it. People had always told me I would like it, and I fell in love with that movie so fast. I think it's such a moving movie. It's definitely not comedic, but there's a quirkiness and an unconventional aesthetic and sensibility that he brings to it that makes it feel so specific and distinctive that I love. And I'm here representing Canada, and everyone has Jacob Tierney fever now because of Heated
Yeah.
Rivalry. And I would encourage people to go back and watch his debut feature, Twist, which is a really special queer movie with really bold cinematography, and it's a really interesting movie. So yeah, those are a couple that come to mind.
Yeah, I mean Gregor Araki, I think he's probably one of the founders of like modern day queer cinema. And I think a lot of queer, like young queer people need to go and watch more queer movies because I think a lot of times a lot of young queer people look to, mainstream media, stuff like Heated Rival, which is brilliant. But I think a lot of them aren't exploring some of the necessities for queer cinema. So what are some of your like essential queer films to watch?
So I would say Lilies, another Canadian classic from, it was being made in the 80s, it's such a trailblazer movie because at that time it was so bold to be making such an
Yeah.
overtly queer film. Like I have so much respect for the filmmakers at that time who had the courage to do that. And so that's one. Let me think what. Oh, you know what? There's a great Pedro Moldovar film called Bad Education, which it's a soft spot for me because that was the first gay date I ever went on. The first date I ever went on with a man. I took him to see that movie, and it's actually a very explicit film. So I wasn't expecting that. I was a little overwhelmed because I was already nervous enough. I was like 1 foot out of the closet door, and sitting there in this movie theater watching this like very sensuous movie was like a little overwhelming, but I look back on that so fondly. I haven't seen it in a long time and I should rewatch it, but that's a movie that I think doesn't get the credit it deserves and people
Mm.
should seek it out. Pedro Moldovar, any of his movies, they're always a little bit unexpected. He doesn't follow the mold of, yeah, what you're talking about, these mainstream queer movies that um, everyone is exposed to. He's a little bit, I mean, obviously he's very celebrated in mainstream in its own way, but some of his lesser known movies are really special to seek out as well,
Mm.
for sure.
Yeah, I mean, I think queer stories are such important pieces of things to tell, and every queer film, even though they may not be like getting the biggest release, they are still so monumental in steps towards queer stories being normalized in film. So, what do you hope that audiences take away when watching this movie?
Yeah, I hope that people see themselves it reflected in the characters, even if the characters are very different from them on a superficial level, even if it's a non-queer audience, but definitely for queer audiences. Like I think queer audiences will see a lot of their journey because it isn't just about um, his romantic relationships. It's also just about his seek for identity, seeking to belong. Those bigger questions I think a lot of young queer people wrestle with in a way that is much more profound than people who aren't queer. Like it's such a defining part of your coming of age, I guess. So I definitely hope queer audiences see themselves reflected in it, but I also hope that non-queer audiences can find something universal to relate to in all these characters, because I think a lot of these struggles are universal
Mhm.
ultimately. So yeah.
Perfect. And just to tell the audience where they can find this movie once it's,
Yeah.
in BFI, do you want to just tell the audience where they can find it?
Yeah, so we have some distribution deals in place. So we're getting a theatrical release in the UK in late spring, early summer. The exact dates are not determined yet, but stay tuned because it'll be somewhere soon. Hopefully, we'll know. And then it's coming out in the States, limited theatrical release in the fall. And then we're getting another release in France in early 2027. So we're hoping to go to a bunch of festivals between now and then. So, hopefully we'll have more news about that soon. We're waiting to hear back about some festivals, and then we'll definitely be coming out in the US and London and then eventually France in a few months. So website for any updates as well. So yeah.